The sun had barely crested over the dusty horizon of Fort Stockton, Texas, when Yates Preston saw her kneeling in the dirt behind the livery stable, breaking off pieces of stale bread for a skeletal dog that looked more dead than alive. The year was 1878, and in all his 32 years on this earth, he had never seen anyone waste food on a creature so close to meeting its maker, but something about the gentle way her fingers moved and the soft words she whispered to that dying animal made him stop his horse mid-stride and just watch. She was thin herself, her dress patched in so many places it was hard to tell what the original fabric had been, and her dark hair hung loose down her back in tangles that spoke of weeks without proper shelter. The dog's ribs showed through its matted fur like the bars of a cage, and it trembled as it ate, as though afraid each bite might be its last. Yates sat there on his mare for a long moment, taking in the scene, and then he made a decision that would change everything. He dismounted without a sound, his boots hitting the packed earth softly, and he walked over to where she knelt. She looked up at him with eyes that were the color of autumn leaves, brown with flecks of gold, and in them he saw wariness mixed with a kind of defiant pride that told him she would not beg for anything, not even if she was starving herself. The dog growled weakly, trying to protect her even in its pitiful state, and she laid a hand on its head to calm it. Yates did not say a word. He simply looked at her, then at the dog, then back at her again. He held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it and let him pull her to her feet. She swayed slightly, and he realized she was probably as hungry as the dog. Without releasing her hand, he bent down and scooped up the trembling animal in his other arm, cradling it against his chest like it weighed nothing at all. The woman stared at him with those autumn eyes, confusion and hope warring in her expression, and he jerked his head toward his horse. She followed him on unsteady legs, and he helped her mount first before handing her the dog and swinging up behind her. She fit against him like she was meant to be there, and as they rode through the awakening town toward his ranch, 3 miles outside Fort Stockton, he felt her gradually relax into his hold. His ranch was modest but well kept, a 2-room cabin with a barn and a corral that held 6 horses and a few cattle. Yates had built most of it with his own hands over the past 5 years, carving out a life for himself after his parents had died of fever. He had always figured he would live out his days alone, content with his livestock and the occasional trip into town for supplies and conversation. But as he helped this strange woman down from his horse and carried the dog inside, he felt something shift in his chest that he had never felt before. He laid the dog on a blanket near the fireplace and then turned to her. She stood in the middle of his main room, looking around with wide eyes, her hands clasped in front of her like she did not know what to do with them. Yates went to his larder and pulled out bread, cheese, dried meat, and a jar of preserves his neighbor had given him last month. He set it all on the table and gestured for her to sit. She sat slowly as though afraid the chair might disappear beneath her, and when he pushed the food toward her, she looked up at him with tears suddenly streaming down her dirty cheeks. He pretended not to notice and instead went to fetch water for the dog, giving her privacy to eat and cry if she needed to. When he returned, she had eaten some of the bread and cheese, and the color was starting to come back into her face. "Thank you," she whispered, and her voice was hoarse from disuse or emotion, he could not tell which. "I did not think anyone would help." Yates nodded and knelt by the dog, trickling water into its mouth. The animal lapped weakly at it, and he could feel its heart beating rapid and thready against his palm. It might not make it through the night, but he would try. He had always had a soft spot for creatures that refused to give up, even when the world had beaten them down. "What is your name?" he asked without looking up from the dog. "Amelia," she said. "Amelia Dalton. And I do not know the dog's name. I only found him yesterday, abandoned near the church." "Amelia," he repeated, tasting the name. It suited her somehow, old-fashioned and pretty. "I am Yates Preston. This is my ranch. You are welcome to stay as long as you need." She was quiet for a moment, and when he glanced at her, she was staring at him with an expression he could not quite read. Why would you do that? You do not know me. I could be a thief or worse. Are you? He asked simply. No, she said firmly, but I have nothing to offer you in return. I did not ask for anything, Yates said. He stood and carried the dog to his bedroom, laying it on another blanket at the foot of his bed. When he came back, Amelia was still sitting at the table, watching him with those autumn eyes. There is a water pump out back if you want to wash up. I will make us something hot to eat. She nodded and rose, moving toward the door with careful steps. He watched her go and then set about making a simple stew with potatoes, carrots, and some of the dried meat. As he cooked, he thought about what little she had told him and what he had observed. She was young, probably not more than 24 or 25, and she was alone in a town where single women without protection rarely fared well. He did not know her story yet, but he knew enough to understand that she had been through something hard. When she returned, her face was clean, and her hair was damp and combed back with her fingers. Without the dirt, he could see that she was beautiful in a quiet, unassuming way, with delicate features and a small scar on her chin that he wondered about. She sat at the table again, and he ladled stew into 2 bowls, placing one in front of her. They ate in silence, but it was not uncomfortable. Yates had never been much for idle chatter anyway, and she seemed content just to have food and shelter. When they were done, she insisted on washing the dishes despite his protests, and he let her because he sensed she needed to feel useful. The dog? She asked as she dried the last bowl. Sleeping, Yates said. I will check on him through the night. If he makes it until morning, he has a fighting chance. Amelia nodded, and he saw her shoulders slump with exhaustion. He showed her to his bedroom, ignoring her protest that she could not take his bed. I will sleep out here by the fire, he said firmly. You need proper rest. She looked like she wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her with a sway of fatigue. Thank you, Yates, she said softly, and the way she said his name made something warm bloom in his chest. He closed the door behind her and made up a bedroll by the fireplace, lying down and staring at the ceiling. He could hear her moving around in the bedroom, settling in, and then the creak of the bed as she lay down. The dog whined once, softly, and he heard her murmur something soothing. Then there was silence. Yates did not sleep much that night. He kept thinking about the image of her in the dirt, feeding that dying dog with bread she probably needed herself, and the fierce compassion in her eyes. He had seen a lot of hard people in his time, people worn down by this unforgiving land until they had nothing left to give, but Amelia Dalton was different. She had nothing, and yet she still gave. Morning came with golden light spilling through the windows, and Yates rose to check on the dog. He pushed open the bedroom door quietly and found Amelia still asleep, curled on her side with one hand resting on the dog's head. The animal was breathing easier, and when Yates approached, its tail gave a weak thump against the blanket. Relief flooded through him, sharp and sweet. He went to make breakfast, and the smell of frying eggs and bacon must have woken her because she appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, her hair even more tangled from sleep and her eyes still heavy with dreams. He is better, she said, and her voice was thick with emotion. He drank more water when I woke up. Good, Yates said, plating the food. That is a good sign. They ate together again, and this time she asked him questions about the ranch and how long he had been here. He told her about his parents, about building this place from nothing, about the harsh winters and the dry summers, and the satisfaction of making something with his own 2 hands. She listened with genuine interest, and when he asked about her story, she grew quiet. I came from Kansas, she said finally. My father died 2 years ago, and my mother died last winter. I had an uncle who said he would take me in, but when I got to Texas, I found out he had passed away 6 months before. I had no money to go back, so I have been trying to find work, but no one wants to hire a woman without references. Yates felt a surge of anger at a world that would leave someone like her to starve in the streets, but he kept his voice even. You can stay here. I could use help with the ranch, and I will pay you fair wages. She looked at him sharply. I will not be a charity case. It is not charity, he said. I am offering you work. If you do not want it, you are still welcome to stay until you figure out what you want to do, but I am telling you truthfully that I could use an extra pair of hands around here. She studied him for a long moment, as though trying to decide if he was lying to make her feel better. Whatever she saw in his face must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. All right, but I earn my keep. Agreed, Yates said, and he held out his hand. She shook it, her grip surprisingly strong, and he felt that warmth in his chest again. Over the next few weeks, Amelia proved herself to be a tireless worker. She helped him mend fences, feed the animals, and tend the small vegetable garden he had planted behind the cabin. She cooked meals that were far better than anything he had managed on his own, and she sang softly while she worked, old hymns and folk songs that filled the air with a sweetness he had not realized he was missing. The dog, whom she had named Scout, recovered slowly but surely under her devoted care. He was a mutt of indeterminate breeding, with wiry brown fur and intelligent eyes, and as he gained weight and strength, his personality emerged. He was loyal to Amelia above all else, but seemed to have adopted Yates as part of his pack, following them both around the ranch and sleeping at the foot of Amelia's bed every night. Yates found himself watching her more than he should. The way she laughed when Scout did something foolish, the way she wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, the way she bit her lower lip when she was concentrating on a task. He had never been in love before, had never really understood what all the fuss was about, but he was beginning to suspect that this ache in his chest whenever he looked at her might be exactly that. He did not know how to tell her. He was not a man of pretty words or grand gestures, and he was afraid that if he spoke his feelings aloud, she would feel obligated to reciprocate out of gratitude. So he kept quiet and tried to show her in other ways, in the way he saved the best pieces of meat for her plate, in the way he fixed the broken latch on her bedroom door without being asked, in the way he always made sure she had a warm shawl when the evenings grew cold. One evening in late September, after they had finished supper and were sitting on the porch watching the sun set over the scrubland, she turned to him and said, "Why did you help me that day?" Yates considered the question. He could have given her a dozen different answers, all of them true in their own way, but he settled on the simplest one. "Because you needed help and I could give it." "But you did not know me," she pressed. "I could have been anyone." "You were someone feeding a starving dog when you were starving yourself," he said. "That told me everything I needed to know about who you are." She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was soft. "I think you are the kindest man I have ever met, Yates Preston." He felt heat rise in his cheeks, unaccustomed to such direct praise. "I am just doing what is right." "No," she said, and now she was looking at him with an intensity that made his heart beat faster. "Most people would have ridden past and never looked back. You stopped. You took us in without asking for anything in return. That is not just doing what is right. That is goodness." Yates did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from orange to purple to deep blue, and Scout lay at their feet, his head resting on Amelia's boot. As autumn deepened into winter, the air grew colder, and the work on the ranch shifted. Yates spent more time repairing equipment and preparing for the harsh months ahead, and Amelia threw herself into preserving food and making sure they had enough firewood stockpiled. They worked side by side every day, and the easy companionship that had developed between them began to feel like something more. One particularly cold night in November, a storm rolled in with howling wind and sleet that rattled the windows. Yates built up the fire and made sure all the animals were secure in the barn, and then he and Amelia huddled in the main room with hot coffee and blankets. Scout pressed against Amelia's legs, whining softly at the sound of the wind. "I hate storms," she admitted, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "They always make me think of the night my mother died. There was a storm just like this, and I sat by her bed, listening to her breathe and the wind howl, and I felt so helpless." Yates moved closer to her on the bench, not quite touching, but near enough that she could feel his warmth. "I am sorry you had to go through that alone." "I am used to being alone," she said, but her voice wavered. "Or I was until I came here." "You are not alone anymore," Yates said quietly. "Not if you do not want to be." She turned to look at him, and in the firelight, her eyes were luminous. "What are you saying?" He took a breath, gathering his courage. "I am saying that I have come to care for you, Amelia. More than I should, probably, given that you work for me and live under my roof. But I cannot help it. Every morning I wake up glad that you are here. And every night I go to sleep grateful that I found you that day. If you want to leave, I will understand, and I will help you get wherever you want to go. But if you want to stay, not as my employee, but as something more, I would like that very much." Her eyes widened, and for a terrible moment he thought he had misread everything, that she would be horrified or angry or worse, pitying. But then she smiled, slow and genuine, and she reached out to take his hand. "I want to stay," she said. "I have been falling in love with you for weeks now, Yates, and I was afraid you only saw me as someone to help, someone to take pity on." "No," he said fiercely, turning to face her fully and taking her other hand as well. "I see you as the bravest, kindest, most beautiful woman I have ever known. I see you as someone I want to build a life with, if you will have me." "Yes," she whispered, and then she was leaning in, and he was meeting her halfway, and their lips touched in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Scout barked once, as if in approval, and they broke apart laughing. Yates pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her and resting his chin on top of her head. She fit against him perfectly, and as the storm raged outside, he felt a sense of peace settle over him that he had never known before. This was what he had been missing all these years, this connection, this feeling of rightness. They sat like that for a long time, wrapped in blankets and each other, talking quietly about their hopes and dreams. Amelia told him about wanting a family someday, about missing the garden her mother used to keep and the way her father would tell stories by the fire. Yates told her about his plans to expand the ranch, about wanting to build a bigger house and maybe raise horses alongside the cattle. They talked until the fire burned low and the storm began to ease, and then Yates walked her to her bedroom door. "Good night, Amelia," he said, and he kissed her forehead. "Good night, Yates," she replied, and the smile she gave him was radiant. In the morning, everything felt different and yet exactly the same. They went about their chores as usual, but now there were stolen glances and soft touches, her hand brushing his as she passed him a tool, his fingers lingering on her waist as he helped her reach something on a high shelf. Scout seemed to sense the change in their relationship and stayed close to both of them, his tail wagging constantly. Word spread quickly in Fort Stockton that Yates Preston had taken in a woman, and while most folks were understanding given the circumstances, there were a few raised eyebrows and pointed comments about propriety. Yates ignored them for the most part, but when the town's preacher, Reverend Miller, pulled him aside one Sunday after church, he knew the conversation was inevitable. "Yates, I do not mean to pry," the Reverend said, his tone gentle but firm. "But people are talking about you and Miss Dalton, and I would hate to see either of your reputations suffer." "We have done nothing improper," Yates said evenly. "She works for me and has her own room. But I will tell you plainly, Reverend, that I intend to marry her if she will have me. I am just waiting for the right time to ask." The Reverend's stern expression softened into a smile. "Well then, I am glad to hear it. She seems like a fine woman, and the two of you are well suited. When you are ready, you come see me and we will talk about the arrangements." Yates nodded, relieved that the conversation had gone so smoothly. He found Amelia waiting by the wagon, talking to one of the neighbor women about a recipe for apple preserves. She looked up when he approached, and the warmth in her eyes made his decision even clearer. That evening, after supper was finished and the dishes were clean, Yates asked Amelia to take a walk with him. She agreed readily, wrapping herself in her shawl against the December chill, and they strolled out toward the pasture where his horses grazed under the stars. Scout trotted alongside them, occasionally darting off to investigate an interesting scent before returning to their side. Amelia, Yates began, and then stopped, suddenly nervous. He had faced down angry bulls and ornery stallions without flinching, but asking this woman to marry him felt like the bravest thing he had ever done. She looked at him questioningly, and he took her hands in his. I know we have not known each other very long, and I know that I am not the most eloquent man or the richest, but I love you. I love your kindness and your strength and the way you sing when you think no one is listening. I love that you would give your last piece of bread to a dying dog, and I love the way you have made my house feel like a home. I want to spend the rest of my life making you happy, if you will let me. Amelia Dalton, will you marry me? Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling so wide, it looked like her face might split. Yes, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, Yates, I will marry you. I love you so much it scares me sometimes, and I cannot imagine my life without you now. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, pouring all his love and devotion into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and laughing, Scout was jumping around their legs and barking excitedly. Yates bent down and scratched the dog's ears. You hear that, boy? She said yes. Scout barked again, and Amelia laughed through her tears. I think he approves. They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, making plans for a simple wedding in the spring. Amelia wanted to wait until the weather was warmer and the wildflowers were blooming, and Yates would have agreed to anything she asked. He was just grateful that she had chosen him, that she had seen past his rough edges and quiet ways to the heart beneath. The winter months passed slowly but sweetly. They spent the long evenings planning their future, talking about the children they hoped to have and the improvements they wanted to make to the ranch. Yates taught Amelia how to ride properly, and she proved to be a natural horsewoman, fearless and graceful in the saddle. They went into town together for supplies and endured the knowing looks and congratulations from their neighbors with good humor. On Christmas morning, Yates gave Amelia a simple gold ring that had belonged to his mother. She cried when she saw it and insisted it was too precious, but he slipped it onto her finger and told her that his mother would have wanted her to have it. Amelia gave him a shirt she had sewn herself, every stitch perfect, and a leather journal for recording ranch business. They spent the day quietly, just the two of them and Scout, and Yates could not remember ever being happier. As winter gave way to spring, the land came alive with color. Wildflowers bloomed in waves across the scrubland, painting it in shades of yellow, purple, and red. Amelia was in her element, picking flowers for the cabin and planning where she would put her own garden once they were married. Yates watched her with a contentment that ran bone deep, amazed at how much his life had changed in less than a year. They set the wedding date for the first Saturday in April, and the whole town turned out to celebrate with them. The ceremony was held in the small church with Reverend Miller officiating, and Amelia wore a simple white dress that one of the neighbor women had helped her make. She looked so beautiful standing there with wildflowers in her hair that Yates felt his throat tighten with emotion. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed Amelia like she was the most precious thing in the world, and the congregation erupted in applause. They held a small reception in the church hall, with food and music and dancing, and Yates surprised everyone by actually being a decent dancer when Amelia pulled him onto the floor. She laughed up at him, her face flushed with happiness, and he thought he might burst from the sheer joy of it all. They rode back to the ranch that evening as the sun was setting, and Yates carried Amelia over the threshold of their home while Scout danced around their feet. Finally, they were truly a family, bound together not just by circumstance but by love and choice. Their first year of marriage was everything Yates had hoped for and more. They worked side by side to improve the ranch, adding more cattle and expanding the vegetable garden. Amelia proved to have a gift for managing the household finances, and under her careful stewardship, they began to build up a modest savings. Yates built her a proper chicken coop and bought her a dozen laying hens, and she was as delighted as if he had given her diamonds. They learned each other's rhythms and moods, the way married couples do. Yates learned that Amelia was grumpy in the mornings until she had her coffee, and that she cried at the drop of a hat when she was overtired. Amelia learned that Yates showed his love through actions rather than words, and that he needed time alone sometimes to think and process his emotions. They had their disagreements, of course, but they always talked through them and never went to bed angry. In the late summer, Amelia began to feel tired and queasy in the mornings, and when she missed her monthly courses, they both knew what it meant. Yates was terrified and thrilled in equal measure, and Amelia glowed with a quiet joy that made her even more beautiful. They told no one at first, wanting to keep the news to themselves for a little while longer, but eventually it became obvious, and the congratulations poured in. The pregnancy was not easy. Amelia was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep anything down, and Yates worried constantly. He hovered over her like a mother hen, much to her amused exasperation, and made sure she rested as much as possible. Scout seemed to sense something was different too, and he became even more protective of Amelia, rarely leaving her side. As her belly grew round and the baby kicked and moved inside her, Amelia's health improved. She insisted on continuing with her chores, though Yates made her promise not to overdo it. They spent the evening sitting on the porch, his hand resting on her stomach to feel their child move, and talking about names and the future. Yates built a cradle from smooth pine wood, sanding it until it was as soft as silk, and Amelia sewed tiny clothes and blankets with careful stitches. In late March, as the wildflowers began to bloom again, Amelia went into labor. Yates rode into town to fetch the midwife, Mrs. Henderson, and then spent the next 12 hours pacing the main room while Amelia labored in their bedroom. He had faced down many scary things in his life, but listening to the woman he loved in pain and being unable to help was the worst thing he had ever experienced. Finally, just as the sun was rising, he heard the thin, wailing cry of a newborn baby. Mrs. Henderson emerged from the bedroom with a smile on her face. "You have a son, Mr. Preston, a big, healthy boy, and your wife did wonderfully." Yates felt his knees go weak with relief. "Can I see them?" "Of course, go on in." He pushed open the bedroom door and saw Amelia propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, with a tiny bundle in her arms. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face, and he went to her, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed and looking down at the small red face of his son. "He is perfect," Yates whispered, touching one tiny fist with his finger. The baby's hand opened and closed around his finger, gripping with surprising strength. "You are perfect. Both of you." "We decided on William, did we not?" Amelia asked softly. "William Preston." "William," Yates repeated, testing the name. "I like it." "Hello, William. I am your father, and I promise I am going to do my best by you." Amelia laughed weakly. "I think you are going to be a wonderful father." Yates leaned down and kissed her forehead, then her lips, gentle and reverent. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you for this, for him, for everything." "Thank you for finding me," she replied. "Thank you for taking me in when I had nothing." "You were never nothing," Yates said fiercely. "You were everything. You just did not know it yet." The weeks after William's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and endless diaper changes, but Yates would not have traded them for anything. He loved watching Amelia with their son, the gentle way she cradled him, and the soft songs she sang to soothe him. He loved the weight of the baby in his own arms, the trust in those unfocused, newborn eyes. Even Scout seemed enamored with the new addition to their family, lying patiently by the cradle and lifting his head whenever William cried. As William grew from a newborn into a chubby infant, the ranch continued to thrive. Yates hired a young man from town to help with the heavier work, which gave him more time to spend with his family. He taught William to recognize his voice, to smile at familiar faces, to laugh at Scout's antics. Amelia bloomed in motherhood, her confidence growing along with their son. When William was 6 months old, Yates surprised Amelia by starting construction on an addition to the cabin. He had been saving money for months, and he wanted to give her the bigger home she deserved. The new addition would include 2 more bedrooms and a proper parlor, with large windows to let in the light. Amelia cried when she saw the plans, and she kissed him until they were both breathless. The construction took most of the summer, but by autumn the addition was complete. They moved into the expanded house with a sense of pride and accomplishment, and Amelia immediately set about making it feel like home. She hung curtains she had sewn herself, arranged furniture, and filled the rooms with touches that reflected their family. A quilt her mother had made draped over the back of the sofa, the cradle Yates had built for William in the nursery, photographs of their wedding day on the mantel. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. William grew into a toddler, strong and curious and fearless like his father, with his mother's autumn-colored eyes. He adored Scout, who tolerated being climbed on and pulled at with the patience of a saint. Yates taught him to feed the chickens and collect eggs, and William would toddle around the yard with his father, babbling away in his own language. When William was 2 years old, Amelia discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she carried the baby with a serenity that Yates found beautiful to watch. They hoped for a girl this time, though Yates assured her he would be just as happy with another boy. William seemed to sense that something was different about his mother, and he became gentler with her, patting her belly and saying "baby" with great seriousness. Their daughter was born on a warm day in August, arriving so quickly that Mrs. Henderson barely made it in time. Amelia labored for only 4 hours before their daughter entered the world with a lusty cry that made them all laugh. She had dark hair like her mother and what looked like it might be her father's square jaw, and they named her Sarah after Amelia's mother. William was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to hold her and help with everything. Yates and Amelia supervised carefully, but they were proud of how gentle and loving he was with her. Scout, now older and graying around the muzzle, took up his position by Sarah's cradle, just as he had done with William, ever the faithful guardian. The years passed in a blur of growth and change. William started helping more seriously with the ranch work, learning to ride and rope and mend fences. Sarah grew into a spirited little girl who followed her brother everywhere and was not afraid of anything. They added more cattle and horses, and the ranch became known throughout the area as a reliable source of quality livestock. Amelia's garden flourished, and she began selling her preserves and baked goods in town, adding to their income. Yates and Amelia's love deepened with each passing year, growing from the passionate intensity of new love into something steadier and more enduring. They still found time for each other, stealing moments alone when the children were asleep, sitting on the porch in the evenings and talking about everything and nothing. Yates never stopped being grateful for the day he had found her feeding that starving dog, never stopped marveling at how one decision had changed his entire life. When William was 8 and Sarah was 6, they faced their first real crisis as a family. A drought hit the region hard, lasting through the summer and into the fall. The grass turned brown and brittle, and the water sources began to dry up. Yates worked himself to exhaustion, trying to keep the animals alive, hauling water from the river 5 miles away, and rationing what little feed they had left. Amelia was his rock through it all, never complaining, always finding ways to stretch their resources further. She was creative with meals, making nutritious food from almost nothing. She kept the children's spirits up with games and stories, shielding them from the worst of her and Yates's worry. And at night, when Yates would collapse into bed, exhausted and discouraged, she would hold him and remind him that they had survived worse, that they would get through this together. The drought finally broke in late October with a storm that dumped 3 inches of rain in 2 days. Yates stood in the downpour with his face turned up to the sky, laughing with sheer relief. Amelia joined him, and they danced in the mud like children, while William and Sarah watched from the porch and giggled. Scout barked and ran circles around them, as if he understood that this rain meant salvation. The ranch recovered slowly but surely. They had lost some cattle, but enough survived that they could rebuild their herd. Yates was more cautious after that, always preparing for the worst while hoping for the best, and Amelia supported him in every decision. They became known not just for their livestock, but for their wisdom and resilience, and other ranchers often came to Yates for advice. When Scout passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 14, the whole family mourned. He had been there from the beginning, the first creature Amelia had shown compassion to, and his death felt like the end of an era. They buried him under a cottonwood tree near the house, and Yates carved a marker that read, "Scout, faithful friend." William and Sarah made wreaths of wildflowers to lay on his grave, and Amelia cried like her heart was breaking. "He had a good life," Yates told her, holding her close as they stood by the grave. "Because of you, he had years he never would have had otherwise. You saved him, Amelia." "We saved him," she corrected, leaning into him. "You were the one who took us both in, remember?" Yates kissed the top of her head. "Best decision I ever made." Eventually, Amelia wanted another dog, not to replace Scout, but to honor his memory. They went into town and found a puppy at the general store, a little mutt that reminded them both of Scout. William and Sarah were overjoyed, and they named the puppy Ranger. He grew into a loyal companion, just like Scout had been, and life continued on. As William and Sarah grew into teenagers, the ranch expanded even further. William showed a real talent for training horses, and he began specializing in breaking and training wild mustangs. Sarah, to everyone's surprise, turned out to have a head for business. She convinced her parents to let her keep the books for the ranch, and under her management their profits increased significantly. Yates and Amelia watched their children with pride, amazed at the people they were becoming. In the summer when William was 17, he started courting a girl from town named Rebecca Miller, the Reverend's granddaughter. She was a sweet, sensible girl who was not afraid of hard work, and Amelia approved wholeheartedly. Sarah, at 15, announced she wanted to go to school in San Antonio to study accounting, and while Yates was reluctant to let his little girl go so far away, Amelia convinced him it was the right thing to do. "We raised them to be independent and strong," she reminded him. "We cannot hold them back now just because we will miss them." Yates knew she was right, but it did not make it any easier when Sarah left that fall. The house felt too quiet without her chatter and laughter, and he found himself wandering into her empty room just to feel close to her. Amelia missed her just as much, but she threw herself into supporting William and Rebecca's courtship, and she wrote long letters to Sarah every week. William and Rebecca were married the following spring in the same church where Yates and Amelia had wed 20 years earlier. It was a beautiful ceremony, and Yates felt his chest swell with pride as he watched his son make his vows. Rebecca moved to the ranch, and she and Amelia became close friends, working together to manage the household and the garden. Sarah came home for the wedding and announced that she had been offered a position at a prestigious accounting firm in San Antonio. She was glowing with excitement, and though Yates's heart hurt at the thought of her being so far away, he was proud of her accomplishments. She promised to visit often, and she kept that promise, coming home for holidays and important events. Within a year of their marriage, William and Rebecca had their first child, a baby girl they named Emma. Yates became a grandfather at the age of 52, and he discovered that he loved this new role just as much as he had loved being a father. He spent hours with little Emma, telling her stories and showing her around the ranch, and Amelia laughed at how thoroughly wrapped around the baby's tiny finger he was. As the years continued to pass, the ranch became a true family legacy. William and Rebecca had 3 more children, 2 boys and another girl, and they built their own house on the property so they could stay close. Sarah eventually met and married a lawyer in San Antonio, and she brought him home to meet the family. Yates approved of the young man, who was clearly intelligent and devoted to Sarah, and Amelia cried happy tears at their wedding. Yates and Amelia settled into the role of beloved grandparents and elder statesmen of the family. They were still active on the ranch, though they let William handle more of the day-to-day operations, and they spent more time with each other than they had in years. They would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset and holding hands, and Yates would think about how far they had come from that morning he had found her feeding bread to a starving dog. "Do you ever regret it?" Amelia asked him one evening, taking in a stranger and a dying dog. Yates looked at her, this woman who had been his wife for over 30 years, the mother of his children and the grandmother of his grandchildren, the love of his life. Her hair was streaked with silver now, and there were lines around her eyes from years of smiling, but she was still the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Not for one single moment," he said. "You and Scout were the best things that ever happened to me." She smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. "I think about that day sometimes, how close I came to giving up. If you had not stopped, if you had just ridden past, like everyone else, I do not know what would have happened to me. But I did not ride past," Yates said, "and I never will. I will always stop for you, Amelia. Always." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear, and Ranger dozed at their feet. From inside the house, they could hear the sounds of their grandchildren playing and Rebecca calling them to wash up for supper. This was their legacy, Yates thought. Not just the land or the cattle or the house, but this family, this love, this life they had built together. When Yates was 65 and Amelia was 58, they decided it was time to fully retire from running the ranch. William was more than capable of handling everything, and they wanted to spend their remaining years traveling and enjoying the fruits of their labor. They took a trip to California to see the ocean, something Amelia had always dreamed of, and they spent a month in New Orleans experiencing the culture and food. But no matter where they went, they were always happy to return to Fort Stockton and their ranch. Their children and grandchildren remained close, gathering for holidays and celebrations, and the ranch continued to thrive under William's management. Sarah's accounting firm opened a branch in Fort Stockton, and she moved back home, to Amelia's great delight. The family grew as the grandchildren married and had children of their own, and Yates and Amelia found themselves great-grandparents, a role they embraced with joy. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a huge party at the ranch. The whole town turned out, and people came from as far away as San Antonio to celebrate with them. There were speeches and toasts, and William stood up to tell the story of how his parents had met, how his father had taken in a starving woman and a dying dog without a word, and changed all their lives forever. "My father taught me that love is not about grand gestures or fancy words," William said, his voice thick with emotion. "It is about showing up every day and choosing to care for someone even when it is hard. It is about seeing someone at their lowest and deciding they are worth saving. That is what he did for my mother, and that is what they have done for each other every day for 40 years. Yates felt Amelia's hand tighten in his, and he looked over to see tears streaming down her face. He pulled her close and kissed her temple, and the crowd erupted in applause. They danced together under the stars that night, just like they had at their wedding, and Yates marveled at how his love for this woman had only grown deeper with time. As they entered their 70s, their health began to decline, as was natural, but they faced it together with the same determination they had faced everything else. Yates developed arthritis in his hands, and Amelia's eyes grew weak, but they adapted and supported each other. They spent more time simply sitting together, holding hands and reminiscing about their life, and they never lost the deep connection that had bound them together from the beginning. One autumn evening, as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset with their latest dog, a gentle old retriever named Duke, Amelia turned to Yates and said, "If I could go back and do it all again, I would not change a single thing. Every hardship, every struggle, it was all worth it to have this life with you." "Me too," Yates said softly. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Amelia Preston. Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life." She smiled at him, that same radiant smile she had given him on their wedding day, and he leaned over to kiss her. They stayed like that as the sun dipped below the horizon, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful and lasting. Years continued to pass gently. They celebrated 50 years of marriage, surrounded by an enormous extended family. 4 generations gathered to honor their love and commitment. Yates was 82 now, and Amelia was 75, and they moved more slowly and tired more easily, but their love was as strong as ever. One peaceful morning in spring, when the wildflowers were blooming, just as they had on their wedding day, Yates woke to find Amelia still sleeping beside him. He watched her for a moment, studying the face he had loved for over 50 years, and he felt a wave of gratitude so strong it brought tears to his eyes. She had given him everything, a life beyond his wildest dreams, and he had tried every single day to be worthy of that gift. Amelia stirred and opened her eyes, smiling when she saw him watching her. "Good morning," she murmured. "Good morning, my love," he replied, and he pulled her close, holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world, because she was. They rose together and went about their morning routine, moving in the synchronized way of people who had spent a lifetime together. Breakfast on the porch, watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard, a walk around the garden, admiring the flowers and vegetables, an afternoon nap, curled together in their bed like they always had. As evening approached and their family gathered for Sunday supper, a tradition that had never wavered in all these years, Yates looked around the table at the faces of his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Every single one of them was here because he had made the choice to stop that day, to take in a woman and a dog who needed help. Every laugh, every smile, every moment of joy had stemmed from that one act of compassion. After supper, as the family scattered to various activities, Yates and Amelia retreated to their porch, their favorite place in all the world. They sat in their rocking chairs, hands clasped between them, and watched the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. "Do you remember Scout?" Amelia asked softly, a question she had asked many times over the years. "Of course," Yates replied, as he always did. "He was the beginning of everything." "He was," she agreed, "that little starving dog who refused to give up. He fought so hard to live, and he gave me hope when I had none left. And then you came along and saved us both." "We saved each other," Yates corrected gently. "I was just existing before you, Amelia. You taught me how to truly live." She turned to him with eyes that still held that same warmth and depth they had possessed when she was 24. "I love you, Yates Preston. I have loved you from almost the moment I met you, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Amelia Preston. You are my heart, my home, my everything." They sat together as the stars began to appear, one by one in the darkening sky. From inside the house, they could hear their family laughing and talking, the sound of life continuing, of love spreading through generations. Duke lay at their feet, his breathing slow and peaceful, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out to the moon. This was happiness, Yates thought. This simple moment, this quiet contentment, this feeling of completeness. He had started with nothing but a piece of land and a determination to survive, and he was ending with everything that mattered, wealth that could not be measured in dollars, but in the richness of relationships and the depth of love. As they finally rose to go inside, moving slowly but still together after all these years, Yates paused at the door and looked back at the land spread out before them. The ranch that he had built with his own hands, that had grown and flourished under their care, that would continue long after they were gone. It was a legacy of love, he realized, built on the foundation of one compassionate act on one autumn morning long ago. He thought of that day often now, as old men do, turning it over in his mind like a precious stone. He could still see her so clearly, kneeling in the dirt with her patched dress and tangled hair, breaking bread for a dying dog. He could still feel the certainty that had washed over him, the absolute knowledge that this woman and this moment were going to change his life. He had been right. Inside, their family was settling in for the evening, the younger children being tucked into beds, and the adults gathering for conversation and coffee. Yates and Amelia said their goodnights and retired to their own room, the room they had shared for 53 years, where their children had been conceived and where they had weathered every storm together. They prepared for bed with the ease of long practice, and when they finally lay down together, Amelia curled into Yates's side just as she always had. He wrapped his arms around her and pressed a kiss to her forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of her that had been his comfort for more than half a century. "Thank you for stopping that day," Amelia whispered in the darkness. "Thank you for seeing me when everyone else looked away." "Thank you for letting me," Yates whispered back. "Thank you for building this life with me, for giving me a family, for loving me even when I did not deserve it." "You always deserved it," she said fiercely. "You are the best man I have ever known, Yates Preston, and I am so grateful that God put you in my path that day." They fell silent then, both lost in their own memories and gratitude. Yates felt Amelia's breathing slow and deepen as she drifted off to sleep, and he held her closer, unwilling to let go even for a moment. He knew that their time together would not last forever, that eventually one of them would have to say goodbye to the other, but he refused to think about that now. Tonight, they were together, surrounded by the family they had created and the love they had nurtured, and that was enough. As Yates finally felt sleep pulling him under, his last conscious thought was of that morning in 1878, of a young woman feeding bread to a starving dog, and of the cowboy who had taken them both in without a word. It had been the simplest of acts and the most profound, a moment of kindness that had rippled out through the years, touching countless lives and creating a legacy of love that would endure long after they were gone. The Preston family continued to grow and thrive over the following years. When Yates was 88 and Amelia was 81, they were still living independently in the main house, though their children had insisted on hiring help to assist with daily tasks. They still spent every evening on their porch, still held hands like newlyweds, still looked at each other with eyes full of love and devotion. One particularly beautiful spring morning, Yates woke early and simply watched Amelia sleep. The sun streamed through the window, illuminating her silver hair and the peaceful expression on her face. He thought about all the mornings he had woken beside her, thousands upon thousands of them, and how he had never once taken them for granted. Each day with her had been a gift, and he had tried to honor that gift by loving her with everything he had. When she woke, they had breakfast together on the porch as usual, and then Yates surprised her by suggesting they take a ride out to their favorite spot on the ranch, a hilltop with a view of miles of Texas scrubland. They rode slowly on the gentlest horses, with William trailing behind them to make sure they were safe. And when they reached the top of the hill, Yates helped Amelia down, and they stood looking out over the land. "This is where I first told you I loved you," Amelia said softly. "Do you remember? We had come up here to check on a fence, and the sun was setting, and you just turned to me and said it like it was the most natural thing in the world." "I remember," Yates said. "I had been working up the courage for weeks, and then it just came out. I was terrified you would laugh at me." "I could never laugh at you," she said, turning to face him. "You have given me a life beyond my wildest dreams, Yates. When I was kneeling in that dirt, starving and hopeless, I never imagined I could be this happy, this loved, this fulfilled. You gave me all of that too," he said, cupping her face in his weathered hands. "Every day with you has been an adventure and a joy. You are my greatest blessing, Amelia." They kissed there on the hilltop, with the wind blowing and the wildflowers blooming around them, and it felt just as sweet and perfect as their first kiss had all those years ago. Love, Yates realized, did not fade with time. It transformed and deepened, becoming something richer and more complex, woven through with shared memories and survived hardships and countless small moments of connection. As they rode back to the house, both of them were quiet, content in each other's presence. They did not know how many more mornings they would have together, but they knew that whatever time remained would be spent exactly like this, side by side, heart to heart, grateful for every moment. The years continued to unfold gently. They celebrated Yates's 90th birthday with a huge party, and the entire town came out to honor the man who had become a pillar of the community. Amelia made a speech that had everyone in tears, talking about his kindness, his integrity, and the way he had shown her what true love looked like. Yates held her hand throughout, his eyes never leaving her face. And when she finished, he stood and kissed her in front of everyone, to thunderous applause. At 92, Yates's health began to fail more noticeably. He developed a heart condition that left him short of breath and tired, and the doctor gently suggested that his time might be limited. Yates took the news calmly, his main concern being for Amelia and how she would manage without him. But when he tried to talk to her about it, she would not hear it. "We are not having this conversation," she said firmly. "You are not leaving me yet, Yates Preston. We still have more life to live together." And somehow, through sheer force of will and love, he rallied. He regained some strength, and they had another year together, precious and sweet. They spent it doing simple things, sitting together, talking to their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, reminiscing about their life together. Yates made sure all his affairs were in order, that William knew everything about running the ranch, and that Amelia would be taken care of no matter what. On a warm evening in late summer, when Yates was 93 and Amelia was 86, they sat on their porch as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Their great-great-grandchildren played in the yard, the sound of their laughter floating on the breeze, and Duke lay at their feet, his muzzle gray with age. "It has been a good life," Yates said softly, and there was something in his tone that made Amelia look at him sharply. "It has," she agreed carefully. "And it is not over yet." "No," he said, "but when it is, I want you to know that I have no regrets. Every moment with you was perfect, even the hard ones, especially the hard ones because we faced them together." Amelia felt tears prick her eyes. "Stop talking like you are saying goodbye." "I am not," he assured her, pulling her close. "I am just telling you how much I love you, how grateful I am. I saw you feeding that dog all those years ago, and I knew you were special, that you were going to be important to me. I just did not know how much. You saved my life that day," Amelia whispered. "In every way a person can be saved." "No," Yates said. "We saved each other." They sat together as darkness fell, and eventually their children came to help them inside. Yates moved slowly, his breathing labored, but he refused help getting to bed. He wanted these last moments of independence, wanted to take care of himself and his wife as he always had. That night, they lay in bed together, wrapped in each other's arms. Yates felt a deep peace settle over him, a sense of completion. He had lived a full life, a good life, and he was loved. What more could any man ask for? "Amelia," he whispered in the darkness. "Yes, my love? If there is a heaven, I will wait for you there. And if there is not, then at least I had heaven here on earth with you." She was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. "I love you, Yates. I love you so much it hurts." "I love you too," he said, "always and forever." He fell asleep with her in his arms, and sometime in the quiet hours before dawn, his great heart finally stopped beating. Amelia woke at first light and knew immediately that he was gone. She did not cry out or panic. She simply held him close, pressing her face against his chest, and whispered her goodbyes and her love. When their children found them later that morning, Amelia was still holding Yates, and though her face was wet with tears, there was a peaceful expression on it. "He is not hurting anymore," she told them. "He is at rest." The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, testament to the impact Yates Preston had made on his community. They buried him on the ranch, next to Scout's grave under the cottonwood tree, because Amelia said that was where it had all started, where the foundation of their family had been laid. In the months after Yates's death, Amelia struggled. She had lost her partner of 55 years, her best friend, the love of her life, and the world felt cold and empty without him. But her family rallied around her, surrounding her with love and support, and slowly she began to find her footing again. She moved in with William and Rebecca, who had taken over the main house years ago, and she spent her days surrounded by her family. She told stories about Yates to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive, and she visited his grave every single day, sitting by the headstone and talking to him as though he could hear her. "I miss you," she would say. "I miss you so much it feels like I cannot breathe sometimes. But I am trying to be strong, like you would want me to be. I am trying to find joy in our family, in the legacy we built together. I hope you are proud of me." Amelia lived for 3 more years after Yates's passing, years filled with the love of her family and the comfort of her memories. She taught her great-great-grandchildren how to bake bread and tend a garden, and she told them stories about their great-great-grandfather, the cowboy who had taken in a starving woman and a dying dog without a word, and changed all their lives forever. On a spring morning, much like the one when she and Yates had ridden up to the hilltop, Amelia passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 89. Her last words, spoken to William the night before, were about Yates. "I will see him soon," she had said with a smile. "I know he is waiting for me." They buried her next to Yates, and the entire town mourned the passing of a remarkable woman. At her funeral, William stood to give the eulogy, and he told the story one last time, the story of how his parents had met, how love had bloomed from compassion, and how two people had built an extraordinary life together. "My mother used to say that the best things in life come from the smallest acts of kindness," William said, his voice breaking with emotion. "She was proof of that. A piece of bread given to a starving dog, a cowboy who stopped when everyone else rode past. That is where our family began. That is the foundation everything else was built on. Compassion, kindness, love. My parents lived those values every day, and they taught us to do the same." The Preston Ranch continued to thrive for generations, becoming one of the most successful in all of Texas. But more than the land or the cattle or the money, the family's greatest legacy was the story of Yates and Amelia, a reminder that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that kindness could change lives, and that the smallest acts of compassion could ripple out through time, touching countless lives and creating something beautiful and enduring. Years later, when a young Preston descendant asked her grandmother why the family always left wildflowers on the graves of their ancestors, she was told the story. "Because wildflowers bloomed on the day they were married," the grandmother explained. "And because your great-great-great-great-grandmother loved them, but mostly because they are a reminder that beautiful things can grow in harsh places if they are tended with love and care. Just like your great-great-great-great-grandparents who found each other in the hardest of circumstances and built something wonderful together." The legacy of that morning in 1878 lived on, passed down through the generations, a story of love that had started with a woman feeding bread to a starving dog and a cowboy who took them both in without a word. It was a story that reminded everyone who heard it that compassion matters, that kindness is never wasted, and that true love, once found, never truly dies. It lives on in the hearts of those who remember, in the values passed down through families, in the choices made by people who believe that everyone deserves a chance at happiness, and that sometimes the smallest act of grace can change the world.